Welcome to the Bladder Cancer Canada podcast. I'm your host, Summer Stewart, volunteer with Bladder Cancer Canada. As the first and only Canadian patient advocacy organization dedicated to bladder cancer issues, Bladder Cancer Canada is proud to provide patients, their caregivers, and families with the support and resources they need to navigate a bladder cancer diagnosis. Through patient support, awareness, and research, our vision is to create a world where bladder cancer is just a memory. While Bladder Cancer Canada strives to support Canadians in their diagnosis and journey, we hope that anyone listening from around the world can benefit from these discussions and know we support you too. As a reminder, this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not intended for medical advice. If you need medical information, please speak to your physician. For this episode, we've invited bladder cancer survivor Ryan London from Sault Ste. Marie to share his story. This is Ryan's story. Welcome, Ryan. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to Bladder Cancer Canada about your cancer diagnosis and journey. I was hoping maybe we could start by you telling us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Sure. Well, thank you, Summer. I am currently 38 years old. I was diagnosed with bladder cancer at 36. My background was heavy into mechanics. Through my high school years, I actually apprenticed at an automotive mechanic shop, and I actually worked at a gas station and quick oil change place as well when I was in high school. From there, I transitioned more into aviation. I took college training in North Bay, Ontario, and actually I've been working on aircraft for the past, I'll say, a decade, as well as doing hobby work with my vehicles in the garage, like classic cars and things like that. Currently now, I'm living in Northern Ontario. I've lived here for 15 years, and I transitioned into a law enforcement role. So I'm utilizing some of my success in aviation to help kind of guide enforcement activities in the aviation field.
Wow, sounds extremely interesting.
Yeah, there's days it's full of excitement, and then there's days that are kind of like, why am I doing this? But yeah, absolutely.
I think all careers have that.
Yeah, for sure.
Tell me, what were the first signs or symptoms of your bladder cancer, and what led you to seek medical attention and eventually discover your bladder cancer?
Yeah, so my first signs was actually urinating blood, and through literature and Bladder Cancer Canada, that is one of the first major signs of bladder cancer. After that, that was in the summer of 2021, and I, like most men, especially a younger person, 36 years old, we, as men, we're not very bright. I'm kind of generalizing this, but we like to think that we're bulletproof and we can just fluff stuff off. So when that happened and I urinated blood, I was actually working outside. I was doing some logging, and I realized I was outside all day, and I was dropping trees, bucking wood, and stacking, moving. I didn't really drink that much water. So when I went in at the end of the day, I was urinating and urinated blood, and I could rationalize to myself, hey, you know what? I must be really dehydrated. I've never seen this before. There's no real pain or anything, and I felt fine. I was a healthy guy at the time. I went to the gym 4 days a week, and I like to eat healthy. So I didn't really have any type of eureka moment at that point where I said, oh, okay, like this is bad. And which is what's driving me to try and spread awareness. About 3 weeks later, I was driving my car and I felt a little bit of pain in my abdomen. And I was thinking, oh, you know what? This might be scar tissue from appendicitis surgery I had a few months prior, or sorry, a few years prior. And I was thinking, okay, this is normal. I've had it before, especially after the surgery. It's just scar tissue, right? So I got to where I was going, and I urinated again, and I urinated blood again. And from that, I realized, okay, it's like something's not good. I remember walking out of the bathroom, and I saw my wife, who was an RN. She's a diabetes nurse educator. And she looked at me, and my face was just white. I could feel like cold. And I told her what happened. I said, well, this happened a few weeks prior. It just happened again. There was a little bit of pain associated. Like, what is going on? And she kind of talked me off the ledge. She said, okay, we'll call the doctor first thing on Monday, and we'll get you in as soon as possible. And from there, just playing the waiting game. I don't know what the medical system is in other provinces. I know in Ontario we're struggling. I'm sure some other people might be struggling to get in to see their doctor, and it took about a month. And from then, I went and spoke with her, and during that kind of month waiting period, I did urinate blood again, and I was really starting to become concerned. So that was basically the first sign and symptoms.
So tell me, do you have a family doctor or was this like a walk-in clinic situation?
I do have a family doctor. I'm very fortunate to have a family doctor. The stars aligned when I first moved to Northern Ontario. This doctor that I have, she was just opening up a practice and she was accepting new patients. And I was lucky enough to hear about this and sign up for it. I did have a doctor in Southern Ontario, which led to complications because I was in Northern Ontario and we had to do all this remote things. I've had migraines since I've been 14, which is why it was critical for me to have a doctor. I'm actually medicated for migraines. And that was why I pushed really hard to find someone in Northern Ontario.
36 is a very young age to be diagnosed or to have these types of symptoms. What were the struggles that you experienced to get that diagnosis, especially living so far north?
Absolutely. There were some struggles. And as I mentioned, it took about a month to get in to see my general practitioner. And being young, she, like me, could rationalize what was going on. I don't have a large family history of cancer. I don't smoke. I was athletic. I go out and work on the weekends, doing logging, going to the gym, trying to eat healthy. I have an RN wife. She's a part of her job is nutrition, so trying to eat healthy, trying to do all the right things. And I think that may have delayed the action that was taken in some regard because she could also rationalize what was going on to some degree, saying, oh, maybe it's a urinary tract infection, or maybe that pain you felt was a small kidney stone. She took my concern seriously, but not seriously enough to say, okay, you got to get into the urologist tomorrow. Through conversation, we did say, yeah, okay, you know what? Let's get a referral to a urologist. And because I am in Northern Ontario, the urologist that works out of Sioux Area Hospital, he services all of Algoma District, and that's a huge area. If you look at a map, it goes all the way from basically Wawa, which is 3 hours north, to about 2.5 hours east to a place called Elliott Lake.
That is a
And
big area. Holy
oh,
smoke.
it's huge. I mean, it is sparse, like land mass, it's huge, but it is sparsely populated. But there is only one gentleman doing it. We used to have two. And, the one gentleman retired. I mean, he's entitled to retire, but it just created this huge backlog. Because of this backlog, it took me about 6 months from the day I went in and saw my GP to the day I walked in the hospital. And again, I'm not blaming the system. Everyone's doing as best they can. However, I did have to advocate for myself. I should have pushed harder. But again, I was young thinking, oh, this is nothing major. I'm just going to go in, they'll see, oh, yeah, it's just something minor. And I can walk out and everything's going to be good, right? So it was kind of, I hate to say like a perfect storm, but everyone was kind of like, yeah, yeah, you're young, you're healthy, it's nothing major, right? So again, another reason why I push to advocate when you see signs and advocate for yourself, even if your doctor, for example, say you're 36 years old and your doctor says, I don't think it's anything. We'll just give you some antibiotics. It's a UTI. You can push and say, well, okay, I get resources are limited. Maybe the urologist can't see me in a timely fashion. Is there any other diagnostic imaging we can do to try and help alleviate my concerns or the patient's concerns? Advocate for yourself a little bit. Don't be afraid to push. I'm kind of old school mentality where, the doctor knows best and you know your body best. You go to the doctor because you think something's wrong. So push a little bit and don't just take their word for it. Again, you have to be an advocate for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. This is something that we're hearing consistently over and over on this podcast. So thank you very much for sharing that. So you mentioned that your wife is an RN. How did she take the news when you told her that you were diagnosed with bladder cancer? And how did the rest of your friends and family take it? But I'm more interested in how your wife took it.
Yeah, it was in 2022. So we were still dealing with COVID lockdown protocols at the hospital. And the morning I went in, she drove me to the hospital, but she wasn't allowed in because it
Oh,
was considered a routine thing. I didn't need, like, I'm fully capable. I didn't need someone to, say push me around in a wheelchair. My mobility wasn't limited. I was just going in for something minor, and they didn't allow her to enter. So I was the first one to actually go in at 7 in the morning. They bumped my scope, your uroscopy scope, up to the earliest possible time. And unfortunately, it was a locum. And this gentleman was from Thunder Bay. So it wasn't my usual doctor that I see now. It was just a guy kind of backfilling because my current doctor was on vacation. I got told I had cancer while I was on the table, and it was quite abrupt. From there, I kind of went into shock, and I didn't understand, like I didn't know what the heck was going on. And when he put the scope in, all we saw was this kind of like see an enemy thing in my bladder because they pump it full of saline just to try and look at the walls. And first time going in, I had no idea what my bladder's supposed to look like. So I kind of saw the screen. I was like, well, that's kind of weird. Like what the heck is that? I don't know, whatever. And then he said, well, Mr. London, you have cancer. So after that, he just pulled out the scope, and I thought it was a death sentence. So kind of cycling back to how my family and friends reacted after I got off the table, I'm by myself, first thing in the morning. I got changed in my clothes. I'm just sitting in the waiting room, and I had to call my wife. She was sitting in the parking lot, and she burst out in tears. And we didn't like it was just unbelievable at the time. I thought I was just living a nightmare. After I made that difficult phone call, I had to call my mother and my father. They're separated, so I had to call them separately. My mother was awake. She knew I had to go in for a scope because I was clear with her. I said, I'm going in, just something minor. We're gonna figure out what's going on. Like, I don't know. Right, again, kind of nonchalant. And I told her early in the morning, and she just started crying. I, being at the time not knowing what to say or do, I just kind of let her go. I said, Mom, I gotta make some other phone calls. Jen's out in the parking lot. If you want to call her, I gotta call Dad. Spread the word a little bit. I called my father, actually woke him up. He's a retired firefighter. And it's probably like 7:10 in the morning. And he didn't understand what I was saying. It was just like, what? What, Ryan? Like I said, well, Dad, they found cancer. And it was about 5 minutes for him to try and connect the dots and have to explain it. And he was in more shock, I think, than I was. It was a difficult time. My friends, when they found out, I was instructing at the time at a local college. I had to send out an email saying, like, I'm not going to be able to, kind of be the same prof that I was. I got to go through this stuff. And this was later on after my surgery. They were very supportive. They understood what was going on, and they tried to help me out as much as possible. They collected money and got me like food gift cards and things to try and help me out. My one friend, Michael, he's a guy about my age. When he found out, he showed up, and it was in March, so we got some snow as well. And he showed up the next morning and was shoveling my driveway to try and help me out. So I had a lot of love and support after they found out about my diagnosis. I get that some people maybe don't have the support system, and sometimes you feel alone. And that's why I'm so grateful for, say, Bladder Cancer Canada, and the fact that we can go on these forums or we can have these groups, and not just for the patients, also for the caregivers, people that have to sit on the sidelines and watch their loved one kind of go through this and feel helpless. How helpless would you feel if your loved one told you in as you sit in the parking lot in your car that you may not make it? At the time, I didn't know how bad it was. He said it was, my doctor, my urologist said it was extremely big. They tried to give me surgery that afternoon. So I put in a COVID isolation immediately.
wow. Wow.
I'm in a little room with no windows, and the only one allowed in was a nurse in full gown. And they had to test me for COVID and make sure I was okay for surgery. Like I'm in a shoebox alone with my thoughts. it was difficult for me. And again, my wife couldn't come in. She wasn't allowed. So we all remember COVID. We remember hearing the stories about, people having to say goodbye to their loved ones through iPad. And I was thinking, well, geez, I hope that's not me. I hope that won't be me. I thought it was a death sentence.
What an absolutely stressful situation. I'm so sorry that you had to go through that basically alone. And your wife too, sitting out in the parking lot, I'm sure just scared to death.
Yeah, it was tough. I got to give her props. She and my family are pillars of strength, and they're people I look up to. As I said before, it's easier, I think, for the patient to go through these things because they're 100% involved. It's the waiting, the unknown that is so tough for people, and the caregivers definitely need this support as much as the patients. Again, I'm just glad that organizations like Bladder Cancer Canada exist and we're able to talk and support one another and share love.
Well, thank you for recognizing the caregivers because it is, as a caregiver in the past, it's very scary to think that, you're going to lose your loved one and then you have to continue on somehow. So I really do appreciate you giving a shout out to the caregivers. So walk us through your treatment journey. How did it affect your daily life and overall well-being? And what lifestyle changes did you make as a result of your bladder cancer diagnosis?
My treatment journey after I got diagnosed on the table, I got dressed in a room, and I want to give a shout out to the nurses in the urology clinic at Surrey Hospital. They could tell I was in shock, I think, after I got off the phone. There's a nurse there. Her name's Tony. She's a little Italian kind of motherly figure. She's one of my favorite nurses. They're all my favorite, but Tony really, she recognized there was an issue, obviously. She came over and gave me a hug right after and said, you're not alone. You have us. We're your family now. We're going to take care of you. And that small act of kindness really kind of set the tone for the rest of my treatment journey.
Wow.
After they told me and I kind of spoke to the doctor, and he said, I don't know how bad this is. I don't know if it's muscle invasive. I don't know what stage it's at. I know it's a very large tumor. It was the first thing we saw when we put the scope in. It basically is the size of your bladder. And he told me about what the different kind of treatment options were in regards to, this is what we're going to do this afternoon. And, through TURP surgery or TURPIT, depending on who you're speaking with. And for those of you listening that maybe don't know, it's a transureal resection of bladder tumor, TURBT. I'm sure if you're listening to this, you probably have some idea of what these terms are. But again, maybe you're listening for the first time. I was put in COVID isolation, as I mentioned prior, and then they were trying to push me into surgery that day. They were unable to because there was a car accident. It was snowing, as I mentioned, and I was actually booked for surgery first thing the next morning. In some ways, having surgery so quickly was a blessing. In some ways, it was not a blessing. It felt like a whirlwind. I was allowed to go home, but I didn't have the structure in the way of having my parents come up to support my wife or me. It was just like, okay, bam, we're going to get it done. And my parents live quite a distance away, and the weather wasn't cooperating. I'm in Northern Ontario, they're in Southern Ontario. They had border restrictions, so they couldn't just go through the states. So their trip would have been very long. I was fortunate enough to have my in-laws. They were closer. They're about an hour away, and they were able to come in and support my wife. But the next morning, I got up and got ready for surgery. I was at the hospital for 6 in the morning, and I had my TURP surgery. After that, I was greeted by the doctor after I woke up, and he kind of talked to me about what was happening. He said, yeah, it was a very large tumor. He didn't think it perforated the muscle, which was great, although they did have to send it away for pathology to see what kind of cells were in the tumor. And he was very aggressive with the kind of cutting away of the tumor. I went home the next day. I had a catheter, and I was picked up by my in-laws and came home. And I was communicated with and said, okay, the next steps are going to be, depending on what the results are. After I was home for about 4 days, I was told by my doctor when I was leaving the locum that I may experience blood coming into the catheter bag. And from there, I didn't actually see anything for the first 3 days. I'm thinking, okay, this is great. Like I don't feel terrible. I'm not feeling great, but I figured this out of everything, this is might be best case scenario. The fourth day, I started getting blood into the catheter bag, and it was getting steadily worse. I was encouraged very strongly by my wife. Again, a man kind of, I'm not going to say I'm an intelligent man at times, but seeing the blood coming into the bag, I'm thinking, oh no, this is fine. It's fine. It's fine, Jen. I can, they said this was going to happen. And it steadily got worse to the point where basically the bag was just blood. It wasn't urine anymore. So finally, we made a decision about 14 hours after we first started seeing it to go back to the hospital. And I went into Emerge. In Emerge, my bag connection, I had a kind of a different kind of like travel kind of catheter bag, I guess for lack of a better word. You'll probably be laughing because I'm not medically
I'll
inclined
be
and
honest, I don't know
I'm
what it's
mechanic.
called either. So
Oh, okay,
you
perfect.
describe it perfectly.
Okay, well, it's just this little bag that, is attached to the tube coming out of you and it's attached to your leg. So it's just kind of a little more discreet. Anyway, I was sitting in Emerge and the connection ruptured and I bled out all like my bag ruptured and
Oh
all over
my
the floor in my
gosh.
pants. So I got, my wife ran up to the triage nurse and said, okay, like, can you help us? And they pulled me in the back and they kind of fixed everything up and gave me some medical gown pants. And I went back out into Emerge. And again, resources are limited. They told me probably I'd be waiting 2 or 3 hours to get to see an emergency doctor. Okay, that's the state of our medical system. So I sat there, and about 5 minutes later, the bag ruptured and broke again. So they pulled me in the back again. And meanwhile, all the other patients in the waiting room are kind of staring at me like, what the heck is going on with this guy? Like, so after that, I got moved right to the top of the list and sent into the back. I'll admit that was kind of a low point in my treatment. The mind is very powerful, and kind of going through it, I went through the prior 4 or 5 days to have this and this embarrassment and not knowing what the heck's going on now. Why am I bleeding so much? I said to the nurse, he's a gentleman, and I said, man, I don't know if I can keep this up. Like, I don't know what's going on. This is rough. And he just looked at me and said, well, what are your options? Do this or give up? Then that was kind of the slap in the head I needed and kind of, stop feeling sorry for yourself. We'll get through this. So they moved me into the back. The doctor said that I had an uncontrolled bleed inside my bladder from the surgery. I spent the night at the hospital. They gave me some medicine to try and do some clotting, and it didn't really take effect right away. They were doing something called irrigating my bladder, which is about as fun as it sounds. They're forcing saline back into my bladder through my catheter tube and kind of trying to drain it out so I didn't build these blood clots inside my bladder that I may not be able to pass. The next morning, I was rushed into urology because they only work, standard hours. They're not 24 hours at our hospital, and they kind of took a look at me. And by this time, the medicine the ER doctor gave me started to take effect, and my bleeding slowed down. And they took a look inside and said, "Okay, we see what's going on. It looks like it's slowing down and stopping. We're going to keep you here for a few more hours and look at you. But if it does stop, you'll be okay to go home." And after that, I did go home and I was able to allow my body to recover for quite a few weeks. After that, I went through a treatment called BCG. For those of you who don't know, it was a tuberculosis vaccine that was kind of discovered back in the early 1900s. And I just got this information from Bladder Cancer Canada through another podcast. So if you guys are listening and you want to know more about it, check out that podcast. I won't go into it, but it is kind of at the moment, at the time, it's the standard treatment for non-muscle invasive bladder cancer, which is what I had. We didn't have to go through the full extreme where some people unfortunately have to go through bladder removal or neobladders or things like that. So that's kind of my treatment journey. I had a few or 6 weeks of BCG treatment. Your follow-up question is how did it affect your daily life and overall well-being? For about a year, even after I got diagnosed, I went through surgery, I had my BCG treatment. I would wake up in the morning And one of the first thoughts that went through my head was, you have cancer. And I was still trying to work BCG treatments. I don't know if it's because I'm a younger person. I responded very aggressively. My body responded very aggressively to the treatment. I was given max dosage because my pathology report came back as, yeah, it's non-muscle invasive, but it's very high grade, very aggressive. They want to make sure that the chances of reoccurrence, or give me every chance to limit that reoccurrence. So they're giving me full dosage of BCG. At the time, there was a small shortage. I believe Bladder Cancer Canada worked with a lot of suppliers to eliminate this shortage. So I know in the States there are some places that are still saying, "Oh, we can't get enough, we can't get enough," but they are bouncing back. But anyway, I'm digressing slightly. I had BCG treatments. I had about three of them, and then I was in rough shape. The fourth treatment I try to go into, how they give you the BCG treatment is they put a catheter in. And for me, I was so inflamed. My prostate was so inflamed, they couldn't actually put the catheter in without causing me extreme pain. So they made the decision to stop the treatment. I stopped for a few weeks and took some antibiotics, anti-inflammatory. And after that, they tried to reinitiate the treatment. I went for another week, got very inflamed, and it kind of progressed on to the full 6 weeks of treatment. But that full 6 weeks took about 3 or 4 months. At the time, I was still trying to teach. I was teaching at the time, and it was difficult. My daily life was affected, not just physically, but the mind game as well, being constantly tired. My joints got sore, could be a side effect, like my hands, my elbows, knees, things that, kind of took a beating early on in life as my early stages as a mechanic. You slip on a wrench and bust your knuckle. And it seems like any time I had hurt a joint in my life, it was amplified. I was, as I mentioned, very fatigued, but kind of the weird side effect I had was extreme sensitivity to heat. And I kind of did some
Interesting.
reading, and this is very rare. My urologist had never even heard of, someone getting this kind of adverse reaction to heat. If I went outside, I would sweat immediately. I would try and walk my dogs around the block to stay, active as I was used to. Couldn't do that. Like, I'd have to change my shirt when I came back. And this was summertime. I'd go to the beach with my wife and nieces and family. I had to sit in the shade, and even so, I was just sweating. I wasn't even doing anything. I was just sitting there sweating. That was very difficult. I couldn't enjoy and do the things that I used to do. And again, this constant fatigue, pain, sweating, it really played into kind of my mental health. And that's a big kind of thing that we need to think about as both people who are doing caregiving and the patients. It physically you can recover from things, but mentally you need to talk. You need to tell someone how you're feeling, and don't try and go through this alone. I felt that I had burdened my family enough, and I tried to tackle this on my own,
Oh.
and definitely not something I recommend. So,
I can
it
imagine that's something that a lot of patients do struggle with, is not being a burden. I know when my mom was sick with cancer, that was a big thing that she was devastated about, was losing her independence and feeling like she was a burden on her family.
Yeah, and that went through my mind as well. Even when I was leaving the hospital, they wheeled me in the wheelchair to the exit doors, and I had to walk to the car. My father-in-law grabbed my arm and tried to help me to the car, and it's like, oh no, no, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. I can do this, I can do this, trying to be independent still. And just kind of with the holiday season, it's even more amplified for people who are maybe going through treatment. And it's just something I want to talk about, being that this might be a holiday episode. When the holiday season rolled around and I was still going through treatment or not feeling great, and I'd see my family, I didn't want to be a burden. I wanted to be me. I wanted to have everyone treat me the same. I didn't want to talk about my diagnosis. I didn't want to talk about the side effects. I didn't want to talk about when my next treatment was or what the game plan is. And I understand that people who are in your family or friends, they want to be involved. They want to help. They want to understand. And that's great. But when it's, say, Christmas, and you're just seeing your family you haven't seen in a long time, and post COVID, the last thing you want to do is talk about the treatments and things that you've gone through the past year. You want to be able to enjoy those moments because at the end of the day, your mind, you're still thinking, this might be the last time I get to do this. Allow me to be me, and don't allow me to be the illness. Don't identify me as a patient. I'm a patient every time I go to the hospital. As much as those nurses and doctors are very kind, at the end of the day, you are a patient, and allow me to, or allow us as patients to just enjoy the moment. And that's something I wanted to kind of plug and share. It's difficult enough. Don't treat us as something less.
Thank you for sharing that. Bladder cancer can be a physically and emotionally challenging experience. I know that you've shared some of the challenges that you've experienced and faced during your treatment and recovery. Was that the only treatments that you had? Was there any follow-up treatments? And did you experience any other significant challenges with your bladder cancer treatments?
Yeah, I did kind of touch on the physically and emotionally challenging experiences. I'm not ashamed to admit I actually had to go to counseling for kind of the stuff I went through. Again, trying not to burden my family with any more, my emotional health. I think as a man, it's tough to admit this, and admit this on, like, say, a podcast that people can listen to. But our emotional health for everybody is very important. It's as important as our physical health. The brain affects the body. So I think having the strength and courage to recognize in yourself that you do need help is very brave. And for those of you who might be dealing with some emotional health issues along with physical health, go, if you can, go talk to somebody. Even it doesn't have to be a professional, talk to a friend, someone who can just listen. Sometimes all we want is someone to listen and not give us advice. Just say, yeah, that sucks. I'm sorry to hear that. And the caregivers see it, but again, you don't want to burden them. They know it sucks. It sucks for them too. They're living it. They're living it with you. The most significant challenges I faced during my treatment and recovery, I think I was initially getting the time to go and see the professional, the urologist. That backlog of 6 months, I don't know how my treatment would have changed. I was lucky it didn't perforate into my muscle from my bladder, but that was a significant challenge, was the wait time. And that's something I couldn't really do or change personally. I'm a product of the system, and the system is struggling. I think initially I should have pushed harder after I saw blood for the first time. I think that talking about the symptoms and Bladder Cancer Canada's approach to knowledge sharing through posters and ad campaigns and even these podcasts is great. I didn't recognize those symptoms early on, and I shouldn't have to rely on, say, a Netflix show to identify whether or not, this is serious. And the Netflix show I'm referencing is Mindhunter. And it was a show that came out in 2022 for those of you who haven't actually watched it. And it was about FBI profiling for these serial killers. Yeah, it's kind of something I don't know, if you might be feeling weird, like, why are you watching this? But remember,
I
we
think a
all
lot
watched
of
it.
people watch this kind of stuff. So
Oh, okay,
you're in
okay.
good
But
company,
I
I'm
mean,
sure.
we all watched The Tiger King. So I
Yeah.
mean, that was, I don't know if that'd be as popular as it was. I think kind of in COVID, it's like, okay, it might be bad, but this is a train wreck. So I feel better about myself. But
Yeah.
anyway, yeah, so one of the scenes in Mindhunter is one of these FBI profilers actually goes to the bathroom and urinates blood, and he actually ends up with prostate cancer. I remember seeing this episode and turning to my wife and looking at her, and she said, "Well, it's not that, it's not that." Like, it can't be. I think that we need to talk more about the fifth most common cancer in Canada and the early warning signs. If I had known what I know now, when I first urinated blood, I wouldn't have waited the 2, 3 weeks after that for the second occurrence. I would have made sure I pushed and got into the doctor sooner and pushed my doctor to go see a urologist sooner. Or even travel. I was fortunate enough to be able to travel. If I had to go to Toronto to get in sooner, I would have done that. Again, knowing what I know now, but hindsight is always 2020.
Right. So you did mention the healthcare providers in your cancer journey. I know that you had mentioned the nurses giving you kind of special treatment because it was COVID and making you feel like you were family and in good company. Was there anything else that you'd like to highlight of your experience with the medical team?
My medical team in Sault Ste. Marie is great. They are phenomenal. They and I don't think it was just me. I think this is just the way they are. Yeah, I was kind of a unique case being so young, but I have always seen them treat everyone with compassion and care, and they try their best to remember your name. They try their best to remember key things like, oh, how is so and so, that you talked about last time. And I don't know if they have all this written down the file, maybe just to try and alleviate some stress, but regardless, it makes you feel less like a patient, less like a number, and more like someone they genuinely care about because they do. My doctor and the nurses, after I got the surgery and before the BCG, they took the time and sat with me. And I know my doctor, Dr. Hyder here in town, he's a busy guy. As I said, he services all of Algoma. He's a one man crew right now. He took the time and sat with me and alleviated concerns. At the time, they allowed my nurse or my nurse wife to come in and she asked the questions that maybe I wouldn't think to ask. And not everyone is fortunate to have someone in the medical field and know what questions to ask. But they, and along with Bladder Cancer Canada, provided literature and these patient guidebooks that Bladder Cancer Canada publishes. They're written by patients for patients and kind of edited or reviewed by doctors to make sure that the information being presented is accurate. That combined with the care and attention that I had really alleviated a lot of concerns and helped me understand more about like what was going to happen. What did they do? A lot of fear comes from unknown. And if you feel that you have people in your corner that aren't just family and caregivers, people that genuinely care about you, and organizations that try to make the knowledge available to you and alleviate your concerns or alleviate your fear goes a long way. Aside from the urology department at Superior Hospital, I have a oncologist. He has been fantastic. He still looks at me and brings me in for, say, a chest X-ray or a ultrasound or a CAT scan every 6 months to make sure that they didn't miss anything. There hasn't been any spread of this cancer, and he was very genuine with me as well. I think working in that field, working in the field where you see a lot of hardship, I think that definitely needs to be part of a lot of their kind of, I don't want to say training, but I think it's just the care personality that these doctors and nurses have. The cancer clinic at the Surrey Hospital, I've had to go in there to get blood work. They're fantastic as well. It's the feeling that you have people by your side, I think is the best thing that anyone going through this can really draw strength from. So yeah, again, I'm glad you gave me the opportunity, Summer, to give a shout out to those of us who work tirelessly in the field and are able to support people like me, and it goes a long way. Care is not just delivering medicine or making a diagnosis. It's a holistic approach, and I'm very fortunate that the people at the hospital and that I am engaged with are able to recognize that and provide that to the patients.
Oh, that's wonderful that you had a good experience in kind of a bad experience, right? So, you're going through a lot, but I think you're right. The people around you and the support and care that you receive, it's tenfold, just a little bit of care goes a really long way when you're scared and you're the unknown and also the education component of it too. I think empowering yourself with education, you get a little bit stronger and feeling like you're a little bit more in control as opposed to being completely in the dark. Now, you mentioned that you had received a booklet from Bladder Cancer Canada. Is that how you found Bladder Cancer Canada initially?
My wife actually pushed hard for me to read more about the bladder cancer that I had and the literature through Bladder Cancer Canada. And through my mental state, kind of right after the diagnosis and going through what I went through and all the fatigue and pain, I was very reluctant to kind of engage with any type of more learning. I just like, you know what? I'm just along for the ride at this point. And that was a negative reflection on my mental health at the time. I was not in a good headspace.
Well, I mean, that's understandable. I mean, you're probably exhausted and you've just been going on this kind of hamster wheel of cancer treatments, and it's a whole thing. It's a whole world that you're in. So to submerge yourself even further in that world can feel daunting.
It was daunting. I kind of wanted to bury my head in the sand. I didn't want to read anymore, right? But I was encouraged by her to read more about the literature. Again, she read the pamphlets that we had and went online to Bladder Cancer Canada and talked about groups. And I found that later on, probably about a year later, I was going on to Instagram and I saw Krista, who is another Bladder Cancer Canada survivor. She did these live Q&As. And I watched a couple of them and I realized, man, I'm not the only one who went through these things. I'm not the only one who maybe had these fears or had these traumatic experiences. For me, it was, in the big scheme of things, not as traumatic as some others, but I guess we can't really compare. At the end of the day, I was still in the hospital, and I had the unknown. I had the mental health issues where I was kind of down in the dumps, depressed. I wasn't alone. And between the booklets, my wife encouraging me, and these awesome things that Bladder Cancer Canada does through like networking forums, live in-person Q&As, or even Instagram Q&As. I actually reached out to Krista and we developed a bit of a rapport because we were diagnosed the same year. We were diagnosed almost at the same age. We both had very similar experiences where this came out of left field, like non-smoker, healthy, why, right? And from there, I started pushing and asking more questions. And I wanted to actually share my story. And that's kind of my journey to find Bladder Cancer Canada. They're a relatively young organization, only been around for 10 years or so, but they've done a lot in those 10 years. Before that, I have no idea what patients did. They'd get the doctor's literature. It's kind of written in, Latin, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
I don't know stuff, like I don't know what the heck some of these words are, but having organizations like BCC kind of dumb it down for us lay people, it really goes a long way to make us as patients see and caregivers see that, hey, this isn't the first rodeo. This has happened before. These are what, people have experienced, and knowing you have this community around you to kind of lean on was a big, big help.
Oh, that's wonderful. And we thank Bladder Cancer Canada for being here, for all the patients, all the caregivers, anybody who would like to educate themselves about bladder cancer. I agree with you. They do a wonderful job of explaining things in layman's terms so that you can feel educated and empowered with the condition you've been diagnosed with. So, that being said, how have these experiences with bladder cancer influenced your outlook on what life, your relationship, and future goals? So, what's in store for Ryan from now on?
For me, especially being closer to holiday season, I was never really materialistic anyway. Yeah, I like fun stuff. I have toys, you know what I mean? I like Legos, but
Oh, I like Lego too.
okay, perfect. I think for me, understanding how precious life is, when you're young, you think you're bulletproof, you think you're invincible, you're going to be around forever. And this really highlighted the fact that we are mortal. We are susceptible to these things. We're not, Superman, Superwoman, or whatever the case might be, right? Whatever analogy you want. We're not bulletproof. We need to appreciate what we have and be grateful. I practice gratitude on a daily basis now. The other night, just going to bed, and it was a snowstorm outside. I'm thinking I'm grateful that I have a nice warm bed. I have my dog, my wife. I have people who care about me. I'm in a warm house with a roof over my head. That didn't really occur before this. I hate to say I wasn't as mindful. I didn't practice mindfulness or gratitude like I should. There's a lot of apps out there now that help you try and do this, but some people think, oh, it's all granola and hemp people, like we don't need this, just go back to work type of thing, right? That really kind of influenced my outlook on life. I am trying to get back into the gym. I'm still dealing with fatigue from the treatment. I really I like to think that I'm going to try and limit my exposure to chemicals, which is kind of why I shifted my career path from aviation mechanics to law enforcement. I'm not exposed to nearly as much as I was exposed to before. Even when I do my work on my hobby cars, I'm trying to be very careful as to what I'm exposed to. Even just changing the oil in my truck, right? Before I wouldn't wear gloves. I'm just, hey, I'm bulletproof, right? It's just oil. Who cares? And you start realizing, oh, maybe that was a contributing factor. Maybe the gasoline I spilt on my hands when I worked at the gas station in high school, maybe that did something. It's absorbed in your body. If you get a splash on your skin within 2 minutes, it's got to go somewhere. So I think being more mindful and, careful with what you put in your body and what you put on your body is a very big thing that has changed in my life. And aside from that, I think it's just being grateful to be where I am and enjoying the little things now.
So that's a great kind of segue into my next question. What advice would you give individuals who've been recently diagnosed with bladder cancer or to their loved ones who are supporting them through this journey?
For me, I would say recognizing the signs was kind of the big thing and the reason why I am trying to be an advocate. For what I would talk to or speak to with another patient who maybe was just recently diagnosed, try to realize that this isn't a death sentence. People hear the C word, they hear cancer. My mother still can't even say the word because for so long it has this negative connotation to it where it's like, okay, well, you have cancer, you're done. That's it. Like game over. I think people need to recognize that yes, this is going to be a challenge, but it doesn't have to be a death sentence. There are ways around it. There are medical advances every day. There are organizations that are pushing to make life easier for people and caregivers. There are things and different ways of diagnosing this earlier. The prognoses are getting better and better and better with more proactive approaches to determining this ahead of time, even if you are diagnosed. We need to recognize that it's going to be tough, but it doesn't have to be life altering. And maybe some people it will be. But at the end of the day, it's your mindset. How do you choose to react to this challenge in your life? You could be like me early on, where I just said, I can't do it. I got to give up. Like, this is too much, and maybe you need that slap in the back of the head, metaphorically, that the nurse gave me and just said, no, snap out of this. You're not going anywhere if you're going to think like that. We need to move forward and take care of ourselves and our loved ones as best as we can and just say, hey, this might be tough, but we're going to get through it. For caregivers sitting on the sidelines, I couldn't imagine the hell that you must go through seeing someone you love and care about maybe not do so well or maybe have struggling days and not know how to help. Feeling helpless is very, very difficult to do, especially when that all you want to do is wave a magic wand and make them better. Talk to friends, talk to other people, reach out for support. Heck, talk to me, talk to others that may be for patients. Yeah, we may not understand exactly what you're going through, but we can listen. And at the end of the day, listening and commiserating to some degree, makes you feel like it's not just you. You're not in this black abyss. We're tribal creatures by nature. We need that group. So it's tough, but you get through it.
No, that's wonderful advice. And we invite anybody who's listening from Canada or around the world. We offer support to everybody who's suffering from bladder cancer to visit the website, Bladder Cancer Canada. And, again, Ryan said that he is willing to kind of go put himself out there and talk to anybody. Bladder Cancer Canada is a fabulous resource for education and really connecting the network. So if anybody is listening and would like to speak to somebody at Bladder Cancer Canada who has been a patient and has experience, please get in touch with Bladder Cancer Canada. It's a wonderful resource for patients. Now, Ryan, is there anything else that you would kind of like to put out there or any last advice that you would like to give patients who are maybe going in for their second appointment or feeling a little bit nervous about the future?
I just like to say that being nervous is a normal sign. We talked about the fear of the unknown. I'm nervous every time I go in for a scope. It's not just the physical discomfort of it. It's, all right, what are they going to find this time? Are they going to find anything? They did find a reoccurrence, and they I don't really know the term, but they used electricity and kind of zapped it inside my bladder. After a year of not having any type of problems, seeing this, again, it's a mental game. I don't really know what to say to anyone is nervous or going in. It's totally normal. Try and have a support group and try to realize that you are stronger than you think. You can get through this. We are very resilient creatures, especially when we have a network and a support group.
Well, Ryan, I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today, and the listeners are appreciative of you sharing your story. I thank you so much, and I wish you all the best of health and happiness and success in your future, and hopefully we'll get to speak to you soon at the Bladder Cancer Canada podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Summer, and happy holidays to everybody out there.
Oh, happy holidays, yes. This concludes Ryan's story. If you or someone you know has been diagnosed with bladder cancer Cancer Canada is here to help you with support programs, informative resources, and educational sessions. Visit us at bladdercancercanada.org to access these free resources and to share your story. Be sure you follow us on X, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. We will respond to messages sent on social media. If you're a bladder cancer patient or survivor and would like to share your story on the podcast, please contact us at info@bladdercancercanada.org.